Welcome back to another episode of Feelin the Healin with Foltzy. Uh, I'm excited about this guest I have today. I've gotten to know this fella over the last year, and he's an exceptional man that has an opportunity to make a change in people's lives, young people's lives, and hearing his story and the things he has to say has inspired me. And he keeps coming up with more stuff that just I find it amazing. So to have him here today is just a great thing, and I think he's going to have shed some light, not just to everyone, but young people also, especially young people probably. Um, Trent Sanderson, he is the owner and founder of Team Prep USA that's headquartered out in pretty much Crested Butte, Colorado, correct?
Yes.
And he works with runners and young cross country primarily, right?
Middle distance and distance, but
Yeah,
yes, middle
and
school to high school.
yeah, and so he has a great story, and so welcome to the show. I'm glad to have you because I know you've got a lot of wisdom to impart on people, and I think it's pretty exciting. Um, First, I'd like to start off. I like to start off every one of these episodes with pretty much how you grew up, where you came from, what where was your roots?
Well, first of all, I'm happy to be here. This is awesome, Matt. I know you brought it up and put this together. I grew up in a small little town north of Tupelo, Mississippi called Saltillo. And I was born in Columbus, Ohio. I was 1 year old, and we moved down to my grandmother's property near Saltillo. The town was actually called Eggville. So it was a land of eggs. Um, and I look back now at my life, and I'm so glad to be grown up in such a beautiful small country town. And, you know, the youngest of four, and much difference in age groups. So I had a brother that's 12 years older. I have a brother that's 6.5, and I have a sister that's about 8.5 to 9 years older. And when we moved to the middle of, I call nowhere, um, we grew up modest and we only had one car. So when my dad would go to work, we didn't have a car. And I pretty much was kind of on my own. And then with my brothers and sisters growing up in a cul-de-sac in Devonshire, just north of Columbus, the big wheels and all the friends, I didn't have that. And it really put a different perspective on my life. I find that it allowed me to look more inner self, dreaming a lot. I grew up with some learning issues with dyslexia and struggled ADHD, and obviously we didn't really see that as someone was in grammar school to help with, so you just kind of dealt with it, and we didn't even really bring it up at all much. Thought that might have fell earlier. Sorry. Um, but trying to live kind of off the land with, I had these three dogs, Puppy, Bridget, and Mutt. And my mom would say, hey, go out there today and come back before dark. And we'd spend all day out there. And I find that in that situation, you just really learn to dream a lot. And you learn to kind of look um, kind of as a glass being half full. And growing up that way, um, and having that kind of missing link to the socialness of having kids around your age all the time, allowed me to kind of be a little more introverted. And then um, as high school came around, tried the other sports, but I tried running. And I had a friend named Michael Crouch. I'll never forget. He told me to go out. He said, you get to miss school, which I didn't really like school, and you get to meet people. You get to meet girls and stuff. And I'm like, okay. So I took him up on it, and I actually started becoming pretty good at it. And I never really cared for running as much, but everyone likes to be good at something. I find with the girl with the nose earring or the boy with the purple hair, they just want to be unique, right? They don't want to just be a number. So I took that on, and academics, like I said, was a big struggle for me. So I couldn't make the ACT requirement. So I made a 17, and you had to be an 18 to go to a 4-year institution, especially to be an athlete. So I had to go to Wall State Community College, just north of Birmingham. And it's funny, to this day, I've had multiple clients from Birmingham, Pelham, Mount Brook area. And you can ask probably any of those kids, they've never heard of Wall State Community College. And it's in Hanceville, just south of Coleman. And I was there for 1 year. And then I transferred to southwestern Michigan, just north of Notre Dame, so right on the corner edge of Michigan. And I transferred into a much more talented pool. And I got a lot better. And just to kind of move on a little bit there, I learned early in life that you become the norm of the group you hang around.
Absolutely.
And man, that made a big difference. I also learned when I was at Wallace State, I teach our kids all the time when I work with them, I say, you know, the hardest thing in college is your roommate, because you have to learn how to share space again, all with someone that possibly doesn't love you, right? And you already know your space with your family, but you got to do it all over again with a stranger. And you're already in a stressful environment. You're away from home, you're a different environment, all those things. But when I was at Wallace State, I had a gentleman named Chris, and he'll probably see this podcast, Christopher Flint, very successful guy in Philadelphia. He used to kind of rag me and give me a lot of crap. He took my peanut butter, stressed me out a lot. And then I transferred, but I never kind of faced my fears there, my issues. But when I went up to southwestern Michigan, there was a gentleman named Pete. And we had another issue. He hit my car by mistake. We never paid, never got it fixed. But then we eventually worked through it. But the point of that story is you face your issues. If you don't, they'll just keep popping up at different situations. So I did that, and then I transferred down to New Orleans, got a full ride, and you know, I became a better runner. I didn't get a lot of attention, but I learned how to seek it within myself. And my mom was my big fan. And as I got better and moved around all this stuff, and I finished college, I really wanted to be successful in something, but I didn't know what it was. And I had the insight that if you made money, you could trade money for time. You either have time or you have money. You don't usually have both. It's kind of hard. So going through that whole journey, I watched this movie called Aspen Extremes. And it was kind of a college type high school movie. But the point of that story is they moved out to Aspen from Michigan, and they hung out with successful people. And at the time, and it still probably is, Aspen has been known as the lifestyle of the rich and famous. So I bought a one-way ticket.
One-way ticket.
Yeah, bought a one-way ticket. I don't know if my dad was a fan, but I did it. And I flew out there, and I got multiple jobs. I wanted to on purposely get a job at the Aspen Institute, because I was always told that was the think tank of the world. And I got a job at the Hotel Jerome, and a job at the Ritz-Carlton/Regis, because it went back and forth those four and a half years I was there. And I was a night security officer. And I also did room service at the Hotel Jerome. And I had all those jobs, and then my goal was to meet successful people. And I thought I could learn from them, because I noticed when I transferred in running, I just became better and better as I put myself around more talented people in running. So I thought, well, maybe I'll figure it out. I'll hang out with rich people, and eventually I'll either have to make it or have to go home. So I did that, and then I met a gentleman, Mr. Meyer, Paul J. Meyer, in Aspen at the Aspen Institute. And we really hit it off. And I was telling him my story, and he was also intrigued with myself and my learning disability and struggle, and how I had this sort of infectious for life, right? I really wanted to make it in something. And, you know, I had my mom, still my biggest, always supporting me. That's one thing I would always tell Matt, from every parent out there. It's good to have a balance. My dad was always feet on the ground. My mom was always telling me to dream and always saying I was fine. Biggest cheerleader, right? Because that's their job. And I literally met this gentleman, and he invited me to move above his garage in Snowmass Village on Wood Run. I had Nil Diamond to the left, Chevy Chase to the right. There's second homes. But pick him up at the airport in his linear jet, shake his hand when it came in. You gotta remember this was in the mid 90s. He had $300 or $400 cash shaking my hand, and I was in heaven, right? I was like, wow. And he keeps saying, what do you want to do? What are you passionate about? And I kept saying, well, I'd love to do what you're doing, right? He's like, oh, you can't just, you got to have a passion. And you hear that a lot, but I'd love to hit on that today. But the passion is, you know, you got to have something you love enough, because you're going to struggle. If you don't love it enough, you'd quit, right?
That's right.
But I always felt, and I do a lecture at camp, is what are you willing to suffer for? Because no one talks about that. And this gentleman, you know, kept asking me, and he kept trying to figure out what I want. I don't know, Matt, if a lot of people talk about this stuff, but he kept saying, and you always hear the natural things, but I want to tell you some of the bolts is, I told him, I said, I gave this girl Beth some advice one time that was on my team, and I kind of liked her, right? It's cute, and girl I really liked to go on a date with. And she took that information and had a lot of success for it. And it just made me so proud, made me feel so good. And I told him this story. He goes, well, go do that. And he said, well, I told him, I said, there's no money in that because I can't coach in college because I didn't get in the loop. I don't have the right degrees. I didn't do this. He said, well, coach in high school or middle school. I said, there's no money in that. And we went around and around probably for almost 6 to 7 months when he'd come in town. He'd say, well, you thought about coaching? I said, no, there's no money in that. And he started getting a little more irritated with me. And he started saying, there's money wherever you put value. And this is before I had the internet or anything. But he kept telling me there was. Then he came in one day. He's only in for a couple of days. And he said, look, I'm leaving for the Cayman Islands because he had 2 houses there. And he said, when I get back, I expect you to have a job, coaching high school. If you don't, pack your bags. I was like, wow, it's a little harsh. So I went to Aspen High School. I went to Basalt High School. I went to Carbondale, and I went to Glenwood Springs. Every place said no. When I got to Glenwood, I shouldn't say every place, but the last one, there was a job, assistant coach, the distance team. And it was basically, I think it was $800 or $600 for the 4 months. So I had to keep my other jobs. And I never forget, there was a guy named Mike Waddell, and I actually have a picture here. And it was another gentleman, Pat Davis, that eventually came out for the team. And that was kind of our group. And I remember he told me many things. He said, treat it like you're treating rocket science. And he said, do the opposite of what everyone tells you to do. Now, you have to take that with a grain of salt. And what he meant was, if you do what everyone tells you to do, you're going to get what everyone expects you to get. And I was like, I mean, obviously what was working for me was, here's a gentleman that was highly successful, right? You know, back then when you're in the billionaire status, I mean, I don't even know what it would be like now, right? Because, you know, obviously there's more wealth out there than ever. But he really told me to do that. And he told me to treat it like you're treating cancer and really put a lot into it, put your entire life into it. So I literally had this working for me because he told me to do this. He was so passionate, he was so infectious, which he saw that in me. So I knew that if I can bring it at that level, then I realized when you really believe in what you're selling, eventually people want to be a part of that. So I coached, and then by the end of the 3 years, we went 1, 2, and 3 in the mile, the 2 mile at regionals, at state we went 1 and 2. We had 2 national champions from Carbondale and Glenwood Springs. And then I got interviewed at Arkansas, Stanford with Vindel Nana, and I got interviewed at Florida State, and it was at Duke University NCAAs for track and field. I still remember this, and I think it was 1999. And I really enjoyed my interview with Vindel Nana with Stanford, and McDonald at Arkansas, which again, legend coaches. But Terry Long at Florida State really decided to take a chance on me, and he said, we'd love you to come down, and it's kind of like a volunteer job, And I said, fine, I'll do it. I mean, I just felt that, I had it. And I also learned over the years, as you're younger in your sport, you feel like there's one way to the top. And now doing it 30 years almost now, with all the coaching and stuff, now you start realizing there's many ways to get to the top. So I took that opportunity and I came down there. And again, it wasn't a whole lot. And they gave me a lot of kids that they wanted to run off. One was this Laura Gerber. And you'll see in this picture, it's at night when I'm coaching her, because they basically wanted me to run her off because she was on a full ride. And you couldn't just take someone's scholarship away at credible conferences. It's a great rule, because if not, a lot of kids would be damaged if they have a bad coach or so. So you just got to make their life difficult. I remembered Mr. Meyer said, do a little bit of the opposite of what they're telling you to do. We had another gentleman named Michael Jennings that, again, had some issues in his life, and he would work out with me too and throw up a lot, but he had some struggles getting along with people and stuff, and he ended up becoming an incredible athlete for Florida State, became a punt returner for the New York Giants, and Laura Gerber ended up finishing the fastest ever in Florida State history.
Wow.
So then he had all these assistant coaches and all these other kids that were, I say kids, at the time, I mean, they were older than me, but they were, sitting there as interns and waiting for their due process, right? Waiting to get into certain circles and spend 5 years here, 3 years here. And Mr. Meyer just kind of really told me about that express lane. So I really put my heart and soul into this, because if you're not going to do something 100%, why do it, right? And then with having that success over that short amount of time, 1 year I became the head coach at the University of Maryland. And back then, it was a head position. I think now it's over one position. I think Andrew Valman's still there. And I was a head cross-country men and women. And then I was assistant in track. And we didn't have much scholarship. We had a guy named Pete McDowell, became freshman ACC runner of the year. And he was not even probably a half or maybe 60% scholarship. We had Megan Braffett, Allison Carney, all these different girls that weren't on full rides. But we got them to believe in themselves. And I'm a firm believer, Matt, that you don't move in accordance to reality. You move in accordance to your perception of reality. So how you perceive yourself is everything. And because my mom always told me that, right? So then, I remember when I was in middle school, you get those fortune reads, and you'd think, oh my God, you're going to find much money in the next week. And all of a sudden you're walking and you're looking around for money. So therefore you find it because you're thinking about it, right? So then 1 year at camp, we bought fortune cookies, and we actually had them already written out what we wanted them to say, because it's like some subliminal advertisement, which made it illegal, as you know, in grocery stores now, because it says buy more corn, buy more meat, but you can't hear it, but your subconscious self can pick it up. Why am I thinking about corn, right? So these are things that just really naturally came, and I got through networking. And I say naturally because I am so lucky and fortunate to just keep meeting the right people in my life, just like the Georgia family, which you're part of. Just been amazing. So, I'm sitting there and trying to find, building it at Maryland. And a couple of girls, I never forget it, I think it was Allison Carney, she said, are you following your dreams? And I realized when I got there so quickly how it scared me, because I honestly felt, as I went through life, when I felt the most adversity in my life, the most struggle, I felt alive. And I felt I accomplished so much. I'm a firm believer, Matt, that you have to have a dose of adversity. And what we're going to talk about is some of the kids that I work with, that I'm always trying to make sure if they don't have it, we create struggle. Because they make country songs about that now. If you don't, the first 30 years of your life, if it's good, usually the second 30 is not so good. So that's kind of it. And then, so then I decided I wanted to kind of build my own company. And where I was nervous at is when I did all that, I got there so quickly, I thought, oh my God, I'm going to become complacent. And I saw that in Aspen when I was there, when I saw these very financially successful people, how they were just depressed. So I taught you about this earlier, and I'll show you this check right now, but this check is $2, and I think it's 60 cents or 80 cents um, from the fisherman company in the Aleutian Islands in the Bering Sea. Because what I did is I decided to get on a fishing boat. I wanted to get on, which I always heard on TV, you have these two dangerous jobs, oil rigs or fishing boats. So I got looking into that. And at this time, I'm back home in Mississippi, figuring out my next step. And I Googled, because I didn't want to do the oil rig, but I Googled fishing boats. And they said to be a deckhand, that's the ones you see on there when they're fishing for the king crab, I believe, you have to go to Seattle, put in about a year in a factory, then you go over to, what's the capital of Alaska?
Oh,
Anchorage or something.
Anchorage, I think
So then you
so.
got to
Yeah.
Anchorage and put time in. And then after about another year and a half, you could eventually go down to the Aleutian Islands and then work down on a boat, cutting fish and move up. But what I did is that was when AOL started coming out, the internet. So, that long version. So I get on there, my mom's computer, and I started looking up stories where they kick people off the boats. If you remember, this is before when I was there, but in the 80s, you hear these stories where they make all this money on these boats and they get an attitude and all this, and they kind of get fired. So I thought, okay, well, my Southern charm, Mississippi, I'm going to buy a one-way ticket again to the Aleutian Islands. Brought my tent. I'm going to camp out, and I'm going to eventually get on one of those boats. I don't want to do it for a career. I just want to do something that's so difficult. Then I
Adversity.
appreciate again
Yeah.
maybe being a coach like I was before, or because I honestly feel like you have to keep growing. If you're not growing, you're dying. So I go there, and I think it was the second day there, I found out there was a job where the boats came in at 1 in the morning, and there were blocks of ice of fish. And you pull them off and put them on this conveyor thing that puts it on a truck. And they only do it late at night. So I would go do this, and I'd walk because I didn't have a car. The Aleutian Islands, if you look it up, it's an island kind of off the little thing towards Russia. So I'm doing this for a couple of days. I got bruised fingers. It's cold. If you know about it, but the Aleutian Islands rains a whole lot. So I'm walking back every day, and the second day after doing it for 2 days, I'm literally in tears going, I was just a head coach at the University of Maryland, and now I'm taking fish off of a boat at 1:30, 2 in the morning. Like, what the hell was I thinking? There's got to be purpose here. So then I'm hitchhiking because, that's what people got around. And this gentleman picks me up in his old red truck. I never forget, there's rust all over it. And I was so focused because then I had people out there like maybe naysayers saying, see, I told you. So I really wanted to make this work. And he was taking me back, and he said, I'm going to stop in at this bar. And I really wasn't there to have drinks or drink it there. But I'm like, okay, I'll stop because I'm here, right? And if you remember, I mentioned to you at the start of this interview, networking was so important to me. It seemed like it's changed my life. It's not always what you know, it's who you know, right? So I got there, and I'm literally at a bar with him, and he's chain smoking in the car. I didn't tell you that. And I'm not a fan of being around cigarette smoke. But I'm sitting there, and they got these casino little machines on the tables, and they're just throwing their cash in there, right? And I'm just sitting there, and I drink about half my beer, and I'm thinking, all right, maybe I should walk home. But I keep sitting there patiently, and I told him a little bit about my story on the drive over, and he didn't say much. I'm thinking, probably barking up the wrong tree. And then he eventually comes back to me, and he says, well, when I'm getting up, he slides his business card over. He said, put your name right here, and I do. And he says, give this number a call on this card tomorrow morning. I'm like, okay. So I get up and I call, and the person answers and says, Can I help you? I said, yeah, this so-and-so called. I said, oh, is this Mr. Trent Sanderson? I said, yeah. And, and I almost feel like he was just seeing if I really wanted to work hard. And I hear that in the movie Pursuit of Happiness and all these things. No one wants, but if you realize the struggle is an exciting part. So you just got to bear into that and embrace it, right? Like I teach our kids, embrace the battle. So then I go there and, well, I get him on the phone and he doesn't get on the phone. But the other lady said, well, look, you're going to move hotels. I'm like, okay. And I'm like, but I got a tent. I really don't want to spend the money because I'm, you know, I think I told you I was really wanting to make this work and I was being very frugal with my money. And I hadn't been sleeping in the tent yet because it was raining every day, but I was going to do it. And they go, no, no, it's all free. It's all included. I'm like, huh? So I go over there and I walk there. It's about 3 blocks. It's a small little fishing town. And they literally have my key and everything. And there was a big buffet every day. Meals were included. So I'm thinking, this is great. My dad always said, you know, nothing's free in life.
You're wondering,
So
yeah.
I'm eating this food, and I eventually go up to the front desk and I go, well, so do you know what's going to happen next? I'm like, am I going to be getting a job? He's like, oh, yeah, you're going. And they go, the boat, I thought they would have told you. I'm like, no, I didn't ask. He said, the boat's coming in the next 24 to 30 hours. And when it comes, you'll be given about 2 hours, and then you got to get on the boat. And I'm like, okay. And I'm like, how long does the boat go out? And they said anywhere from 40 to 60 days. And I was like, so I got on the phone with my mom, and I was like, I was freaked out because I know what we're about to go into, the Bering Sea,
Yeah.
where all the best fishing is. But you have to get through that, kind of funny, got to get through the adversity to catch the big fish.
That's
right?
right. That's right.
Now, granted, we didn't go this time of year with the big crags. We actually fished for pollock. And pollock were the fish that they serve at McDonald's. So if you know the...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, but we were in, I didn't say this to you the other day, we're in actually I think it was a Japanese boat because they overfished their waters. So the people were yelling at us in Asian. So it was kind of difficult. But we're sitting there and the boat breaks down about 5-6 days into it, and we eventually get towed back to land. But we were in a sleeping quarters where there was 2 bunks here, 2 bunks here, and 2 bunks here. And then people were chain smoking. Some people were watching video, all kinds of adult video stuff. And you only had 6 hours to sleep. So you did 6 hours of sleep, 6 hours of work, meal, 6 hours of work, meal, 6 hours of work, 6 hours of sleep. And the reason my check was so low was I bought these boots at Walmart and stuff, and they laughed. They said, you got to have these boots. And they took it out of my check. But I thought it was funny because then I think about, wow, Mr. Meyer, what he said was working. Is I was telling you a plan of 2.5 to 3 years to get on a boat, and I did it in 3 to 4 days.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, oh my God, I just figured out life, right? So I did that, and that made me feel real happy. And then my goal was to get back into coaching because I felt like if I can create a fairy tale area where kids could be safe, like a Crested Butte, a dead-end town, and allow them to be safe and stay for multiple times. Our first camp was a week long. We actually had my high school, Satchel High School, came out from Mississippi on a van. That was my first camp. And then we built it. And, you know, I found that, you know, starting with that, when I first got out there, you have to do other things. And that's another thing I'd like the young kids to see is to do what you want, you got to do other things to do what you want. And a lot of people want to do this before taxes and all this stuff, but no, you got to do stuff to allow you to do other stuff. And if people hand it to you, you'll never have skin in the game. And you really have to do that. So when I went there, I was told that I was going to get a salary. Because if you remember, I just left the University of Maryland. I know I told you that little obstacle of the fishing thing, but that was just a short amount of stint. That's why I wasn't going to do it for 3 years, just to get on a boat. But I literally go out there to told I was given a job, and Crested Butte is one of the beautiful places in North America. I cannot tell you enough how beautiful it is. But there was a dilapidated hotel in downtown Crested Butte called Crested Butte Academy. And when I say dilapidated, it was somewhat nice, but it had broken windows, stuff, and it was $45,000 a year to go to school, and another $15,000 for athletics. So you could do the math there, it's about $60,000. And we had kayaking, we had mountaineering, we had alpine skiing, we had Olympic coaches. We had Shaun White, eventually his coach was one of the coaches there, the snowboarder, Flying Tomato. So we had all this stuff. And when I got there, they said, we really can't afford to pay you, but what we're going to do is we're going to pay you $5,000 for each athlete you bring in. Well, the first year I had one athlete, Daniel Roberts. So I made $5,000 that year. Couldn't even afford to fly home. It's funny, when I work with these people, Matt, these days, and they say, oh, you know, I don't have enough money to eat out. Like, I don't even know what that would be like to eat out, right? I couldn't even fly home. I had to borrow furniture. I had to stay in someone's house for a while. But I kept knowing, though, one thing I had on them is I had people in my life, mentors, that said, it will work. So through my building this was putting one foot in front of the other. And over the last several years now, I've had, you know, this last summer, I think I had 250 student athletes from 44 states and 7 countries. And some years we have a little more country. We did take a step back because of the pandemic, but we're building that again, building a network. And I've been very fortunate. And, you know, even getting to North Georgia, I bought a boat in Marco Island that was supposed to go out to the lake house in Colorado, which is where we usually do a lot of the ending of our camp. It got dropped off in a lake not far from here where I've met you by mistake. And I've kept it. It was the worst business decision I ever made, but the best social decision I ever made. Because it doesn't matter how successful you are, none of us is getting out of here alive. And we really need to have communion. We need to have, you know, partnerships. We need to have friendship. We need to have laughter. Those are all things that I try to instill when I'm working with these students.
You know, it's always funny every time I interview people. It always comes down to the when people come up to a door and they decide to walk through that door. And a lot of people don't, but the people I interview that have that success are the ones that, you know, they come up and they're like, you know what, it might be some adversity, but I'm going to go through. And just hearing everything from your peanut butter being stolen to the chain smokers in your face, and all the little adversities to the big adversities, and the adversity that you put on yourself has made you who you are today. And you want to talk about, I know we've talked about whether it's quantum physics or whatever you want to call it. You want to call it the bigger, you know, the big man upstairs, or the whole, there's a lot to that, right? I mean,
Yes.
it's about, you know, you gotta have a belief system. You gotta know. And you've done everything you just said. It's all about your belief in the next thing. You kept putting your foot forward, but you just kept putting your foot forward, right?
Yeah, and you know, I believe in God. I believe that, you know, it's funny, I have these talks out on my deck in Colorado with one of the pastors out there, Obie Joyful, Jim Coons. And we talk a lot about how religion and quantum physics exist. And we know scientifically fact that quantum physics does exist. It's been proven. It's funny, as a human race, how we do not really spend time on it, because your mind, your thoughts can change your perspective. It can heal you. It can do many things. As you know, big pharma, all these things, I don't know if they want us to know all that. I mean, money rules everything. Money changes everything. But, you know, I can't tell you how many parts of my life where quantum physics just rang true. You've heard of The Secret. You've heard of Oprah. You've heard of all these people talking about it. You know, Jim Carrey, all of them, how it changed their life. And I'm proven fact that, gosh, I mean, I could sit here and tell you stories forever, Matt, but I'm like, I had a 345 credit score. I mean, that's probably just getting your name right, right? But I literally had that, and I paid my way. It's hard, but I literally sat there and got this I went to this workshop in Boulder, and again, it was a nice lady that I liked. She told me to go. We're sitting in these pillows, and they're going through each person, and people were crying and upset, and I'm thinking, man, this is all staged, and I'd always do that. And literally, but as they were going through people, the story was just so incredible and electrifying. I'm like, man, that's some real acting there. So I thought, what the hell? I have nothing to lose. So you got to remember, we're talking about I'm in my early 20s, really early, and I was probably, a little immature. And I said, well, I want a BMW. And if people hear these words, because no one talks about the detail on here, but I'm like, I want a BMW. And they're like, oh. And he said, well, what color is it? And I said, well, black. He said, what does it smell like? And I said, well, I don't know. Because back then, you remember how cars had a really strong smell? Remember?
Yeah.
I missed that. But he's telling me all this stuff. And then he goes, well, what size engine? At that point, I just want him to go to the next person. I was like, oh. So I was just telling him whatever he wanted to hear, right? And then they finally went, and he said, well, no, hold on. This is what you're going to do. You're coming back next week. I'm thinking, I ain't coming back next week. This is ridiculous. We're sitting on these couches, little pillows, and I'm from the deep south, so I was thinking, this is just witchcraft stuff, right? So I'm sitting there, and he tells me a couple things. He says, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go to a car lot next week, and I also want you to bring a mason jar, and I want you to take the smell and bottle it up, and I want you to smell it 2 or 3 times a week. But I want you to test drive the exact car you want. Then I want you to start thinking about you're going to have that car. I want you to see yourself driving it. You hear all this, but I'm going to tell you some things I think that I say you, but tell the people. What they said, though, and what happened is it ended. And a couple people I'd asked, I followed a couple people when they left just to see if they're going to loop back around to see if they were getting paid off or something, right?
Uh-huh.
And I'm thinking, they didn't ask for any money. And it might have been $20 or something to go to it, but I'm like, they're not making enough. I'm always thinking about that. Well, why does this make sense? Is there money being made or something, right?
Yeah.
So when it ended, I went back to Aspen, and my friend Aaron Thomas, massage therapist, still an amazing guy, probably around my age. He was a massage therapist, and he always got life, and he would have been proud that I went. So I told him I did this because he was really big into earth and all this stuff and energy, and that was just so far-fetched for me. But I literally sat there and I talked to him. I said, look, they want me to go drive this car. Would you go with me? And this is where I'm telling you this really hits. And he talked about this, the guy in Boulder. But when I was going to go to this car lot, it literally, I felt like I wasn't worthy. Like, I felt like they were going to ask me to leave. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, you can't be on here. Like, they would automatically know my credit score. I would be like a bad. So then I realized, why would that even come into my life? Because it's just so far-fetched, right? When someone starts thinking about if I win the lottery, right? They'll never get that. So I went there, and as you know, they go out and that's when they put the keys in the door, and they had to go get another one. I did it on purpose, and Aaron went with them, so I could pull out my mason jar, right? Because you can't just do that in someone's car. So I did it because I'm like, what do I have to lose, right? Just like, what do I have to lose by listening to Paul Meyer, right? He's obviously, why would he lie to me, right? So I did that, and then we go, he comes back, and then I go, and I get a job at a gym, and I already had the job. I was making $7 an hour at the gym in El Jabal. And I'm still thinking, 345 credit score, $7 an hour, and I was looking at a 5 Series BMW worth, at the time, I think it was like $65,000, right? I'm thinking, there's just no way, but I'm like, okay, fine. So then I'm working, and this guy, which it's so funny, Matt, I ran into him about 2 years ago, and I told him what happened. And well, he knew what happened with the BMW, and I'm about to tell you, but I told him what also happened. He's like, he just loved it. And we talked forever at a gym at the Glenwood Springs Hot Springs. If you've ever been there, that was kind of where, what's his name, died of tuberculosis.
Wyatt Earp.
Yeah,
The Wyatt Earp?
yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's it, yeah. So we're sitting there.
No, Doc Holliday.
Doc Holiday.
Doc Holiday.
I'll be your Huckleberry.
Yeah, I'll be your
Yep.
Doc.
It was up there on the right above the hot springs.
Yep.
So I met him in there at that hot springs gym. But anyway, sorry, jumping around. But we're in the gym, and I'm back there behind the desk making $7 an hour, and the bench falls on his chest. And he's like, "Hey, can you help me in?" Because, you know, at the time, I'm in my mid-20s. He's probably in his mid to late 40s. And I go over to help it up, and we just get to talking. Just no reason. I have no perspective. He's working there. He's just working out, and we're helping him. And we're talking a little bit, and I kind of help him. And he goes, and then he would come for a couple more days, and I would help spot him, right? And he told me he had some heart degenerative in his family, so he just wants to stay healthier. And he's considering running a half marathon, and he knew that I was a runner. And he asked me if I would maybe go walk with him sometimes, and I said, sure. And I didn't know what he did. So we spent several weeks together, and I don't know what happened. We ended up getting to talking. He had to go to work. I kind of said, what did you do? And he said, he's the president of Bank of Colorado's, all three of them in the Valley. And I'm thinking, Matt, holy shit. He told me, the guy in Boulder, things will just start coming into your life. So I'm thinking, that's how I'm going to get that freaking loan. So then all of a sudden it gave me traction. And I know you're going to ask me later in this later in this talk, like, how do I coach the kids? They gotta see traction. And all of a sudden the light came on. Like, how did this guy drop the bench press, and he's the president of all the major banks in our valley?
And you were there.
Yeah, and we started connecting. And then check this out, because this is why I want to let you know this, is because no one gives you the details, but I'm sitting there, I'm still thinking, okay, that's great and all, but how would I afford the car? So as we're talking, I'm still not bringing up the whole thing about the car, right? And he brings it up to me. He notices that I have a good people skills, and he says I'm getting $7 an hour. He says, here's what you should do. And if you remember, gym memberships all do this now. He says, you should stop getting paid by the hour. You should tell him you get a percentage of everyone you sign up. He said it'll be a win-win for him because he doesn't have to pay you anymore, and he's going to get extra money, right? So as you know, when people sign up for gym memberships, it's usually they're signing up for 2 or 3 years, and it's so less, but they just keep getting it charged right to their account. So then I get those going into my account. So then within about 6 months, I'm making anywhere from $3,500 to $4,000 a month. Remember, I don't have any bills. I'm freaking rich.
Yeah.
Okay? And I'm thinking, oh my gosh. And he made some exceptions. And then all of a sudden, I had a 5 Series BMW. And it's so funny, I couldn't afford the insurance. But I got it. But the point of these stories was, it's just a sickening, relentless work ethic. And I'm a firm believer when we work with kids that some kids come in and they're gifted. And I'm a firm believer you need to be in a situation at a college where you're maybe the top 15 percentile. You want to be somewhere where you're pushed. You need to feel strongly about adversity is what makes success, not education. But I honestly feel that you need to be in a situation, though, if you are gifted academically, you need to be in a top university that challenges you. Because if not, you're going to become complacent, right? Because there's no such thing as just even. You're either going up or going down. So I'm fortunate now, because I always joke, because here's a kid that barely got through the system and barely passed high school. People made jokes about turning in your graduation outfit because you're not going to get the diploma. And I literally had to go to school that summer. I don't know if you know how that works, but you had to take a class or so just so you could walk. And I did. And now, just like 2 days ago, I talked to a girl, Ava, that's at MIT and asking for advice. And I'm thinking, you're at the best, I don't tell her this, but she's at the best institution on the planet. It is. And here I'm helping. So there's something about living life. And I try to I try to let the kids know that adults, people older than you, just kind of went through life a little bit before you. I think, unfortunately, a lot of adults are hypocrites. You know, they tell you one thing and then do something totally different. they're not consistent in helping you get to where you need to go. And I'm a firm believer of just really finding out things that you possibly love to do and researching it and then bringing it to fruition. You know, Middlebury, for instance, they do an incredible thing where when you get selected to go, whether it be the fall or maybe they delay it, they'll say, hey, you want to be a physical therapist? I would love you to mirror a PT for 6 months because you really realize what you really want to do. Another thing, Matt, I want to talk about that I think it's important is we always feel like we're behind. And I think we feel like we're behind the 8 ball and then we rush and we're stressed. And if you think about this, my middle brother that's older than me, like I'm always learning. His name's Doug. And he probably doesn't think that I'm always proud of him, but I'm so proud of him. And he didn't finish high school. He got a GED. And I wouldn't say he was a popular, but he was way more socially gifted than me, which kind of can work against you. And he got this thing called co-op, where you get a job in school, which I don't highly recommend that because you start making extra cash and you got more money than your friends. So he started doing that, and he didn't finish. My dad lost it, you know. And then he started seeing me coming home from college, and you know, I was a track star in college, and he knew that I didn't have the educational book smart that any of our family did. And he said, well, how in the hell did he do it, right? Because I'm sure I motivated him seeing that. So then he was doing this landscaping. He had this old man help him out. He said, look, I'll pay for your night school to be a plumber. So he did that and he paid for it. Then he said, I'll pay for you to get your 2-year degree. He did that. Then he passed away. And his wife was paying for it a little bit, but then pulled it out, so he had to get a student loan. But he ended up going to night school. He got his bachelor's. Then he went to Mississippi State and got his master's. Then he ended up becoming a vocational rehabilitational counselor for the state of Mississippi, and then in Colorado. But the moral of that story was he knew he spent some time in tough times. I remember he would go in his car and turn the heat up in the middle of the day so he'd appreciate the 95-degree weather that he had to go back to mow the lawns, right? So, you know, going through that, you know, Matt, I've been very fortunate my entire life to keep mimicking people I want to be like. And that whole thing when I was college coaching, I started going to Hawaii. I started going to Waikiki because I thought that's where successful people went. So I would go every year for January and February, and I would go and stay in hostels. Even I was a college coach, I just made it, and I'd sit there at those bars and I'd meet people. And I met this beautiful acting coach from LA, and she was another mentor in my life. And I pulled out of my backpack these CDs. That's when we all had CDs, and they were learning language, learning big words, because I really wanted to learn that, because I thought I'd come across better. And she says, no, if you lose your genuineness, people will look and see right through you. So over those years, she brought me into just being so authentic and knowing that what we need to be pushing into these young minds is enthusiasm, infectiousness for life. Because when Mr. Myers said, people will pay you for the value you put on it. You see, it's funny, now all this stuff comes out now because we didn't have it before, but you've seen the thing about the car. They had like a old Corvette, and they go and take it to a car lot and said, we'll give you $300. Then they take it to a pawn shop, said, we'll give you $500. They go take it somewhere else, and then they take it to this one car place, and they said, we'll give you $150,000. And the grandfather tells the person, says, see, you put yourself where people value that or value you. And that's just been so important in my life, Matt.
You know, and I was gonna, and one of the things I did want to talk about is how you inspire and coach young people. But it's funny, as you're telling, you keep everything, you keep throwing this nuggets of, I call it your just potpourri of good value statements you're saying that is, I see how you coach. Everything you're talking about the making these kids go through adversity and the enthusiasm, and I'm sure that's all what you bring to the table for these kids.
Yeah, so I'll tell some of them, I'll say, you're probably 3 failures away. And they're like, huh? So I'm a pretty good avid snowboarder, and I live right at a ski base in Crested Butte, Colorado. But I learned in snowmass, and I didn't know how. And I learned much later because I mean, I don't know if you know much about skiing and snowboarding, but it's a rich sport, you know. So if you have a family of 3 or 4, I mean, you're going to spend, gosh, now probably pushing 20K with the airline, the hotels, and everything, because hotels aren't cheap at ski places. So I went to the top of Snowmass Mountain. Snowmass Mountain, they had this thing called Naked Lady and all these ski runs. It take probably, for a good skier, it'd probably take 10 minutes to get down. For me, it took all day because I was learning. But my goal was to fall down 100 times. Why? Because I was told that you're going to fall down 100 times. It'll be 3 days. Your wrist will kill you. Your ass will be broken, but then you'll get it. So I look forward to failure, and when I look forward to it, I got back up and go, oh my God, that's 30, one more, let's go do it. So I find that just using those metaphors and literally self-talk. So at camp, Matt, we have a campfire multiple times, and what we've been doing the last probably decade, or a little less probably, because we've done many things over the years. One thing I just remember is we tell them to find someone in the crowd, and it's a big crowd, right? 155 kids on a given day. And we want them to find someone and say something good about them. Because can you imagine, like, hey, Matt, the other day you told this about me and it made me feel so inspired. That's going to kind of gift you to go out and tell more people, right? It's almost like pay it forward, right? And if people would just kind of do that, and I tell people a lot, and just what Mr. Meyer said, I don't know if I went into this with you, but like, I find that as you build it, and what Mr. Meyer said is as you start having success, you're going to have naysayers. And Matt, my entire life of doing this now, there wasn't a lot of, if any, private coaches doing it at the level that I've been doing it at. And now there is. There's a lot of them. There's a lot of great ones. There's so many ways to get to the top. And there's things that I've even forgot about, the things that we do, right? And I find, though, that, everything he said came to fruition. On the internet, I have gotten beaten up pretty badly. And I find, though, that a lot of times people will put things down that they don't understand or know. And it helps me bring that over to the students, because in our country, especially America, when you open up the newspaper, the first thing you read about are train wrecks, you know what I mean? Or the underdog, right? So when we root for people in sports, we root for the overdog. I used to always joke, they always talked about Duke when Coach K was there, was the most hated basketball team on the planet. There's even a Netflix series about, who was the guy, the point guard, he was so hated, Christian Laettner.
Yep.
It just reamed every day. But he took pride in that. Now I'm sensitive, so it does bother me. But we tell them, though, that you're going to have people, naysayers. So my point of that story at the campfire is finding people that pick you up. And I tell them, because, see, school, parenting, nutrition, all of it plays a role in your success. And when you make a good test score and you're so excited and you got that one math teacher that just loves you to death and others are not a big fan, and you go to her or him that day and you tell them, and they just didn't bring it. They're just like, sorry, I'm focusing on something else. You need to leave. Because maybe they're having a shitty day. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you're putting all your value in one person, and that's hard. And then you've got to realize that they could have something else going on. Because we all have things going on. We never know it, but we need to be aware of that. And I think running should be in their lives forever. We had ESPN Rise came out to Crested Butte about, I would like to say 13 or 14 years ago, maybe a little less than that. It was after Emma started doing really well, Emma Coburn, the 3-time Olympian, world champion. And as I was talking, they're like, you just think every one of your kids is going to be the next Emma Coburn. I said, you know what? In their own way, they're going to be it. And Matt, I'd love to share this story with you right here. And this will be one we can go a little further on or not. But this gentleman named Chaz Salmon, and I'll show you the picture here too. But Chaz is someone I used to talk about all of our kids, and that was at a Glenwood Springs High School where I used to coach high school. And we've had many stories like this. And this one is one of the better ones for sure. And his dad one time said, and he was a medical doctor, Paul, he said, you know, you talk about my kid, how he just crushed it in this and this and this, but my kid never won a state title. He never even made the traveling team of his college. And you talk about how he's an Olympian. I said, he is in his own way. I said, let's talk about this. He was on the Western Slope. Every state, there's areas that are not as invited, but the Western Slope never got invited much to the Front Range. Front Range is Denver, Colorado Springs, Fort Collins, Boulder, the more higher society areas. And he eventually made it to state. And he finished top 3. And then he got a Duke scholarship for academics. And he never traveled a lot, but he became the captain of the team. They thought so highly of him. Can you imagine not traveling and being the captain of the team? And then he became a Rhodes Scholar and studied in Oxford, England. And then he ended up starting a nonprofit for the HIV/AIDS virus in Africa that he started. And he lives in a yurt most of the year. He's got a beautiful family, 3 or 4 kids. He says, well, if you put it that way, I said, do you know how many state champions would trade their life for what he's done? So it's all about perspective, right? And the problem, I think, sometimes parents get excited because they've really busted their ass to have their kid have a better life. And if you give too much, they will never appreciate it. I used to give scholarships to kids, give a little better opportunity, and then the kids didn't come because they thought maybe it wasn't that much of a value. People pay now, Matt, because there's value.
Yeah.
And they'll figure it out. I've had people take second, mortgages on their house. I don't take pride in that, but I also know there's value there. Has to do it.
Well, you know, everybody has a purpose. And I think and I think everybody some people have a hard time finding their purpose. You found your purpose. That young man who's in a yurt right now, yeah, he wasn't the state champion, but he found purpose through a way. And through that way, he's making a difference. And I kid around about it sometimes, but it's true. You know, you could pick up a bum off the street to change their life, or offer a smile to somebody who's about to kill themselves, who then go on, get married, and have a kid, and their kid ends up being maybe the next president of the United States or whatever, just because you offered a smile. Yeah. So you never know the difference that we can make in people's lives. And I think it's really cool how you're in a situation where you can do that on a big scale. I mean, you have lots of stories. I know you do. We could probably sit here and but the stories and the lives that are changed and through the medium of running, which you say, you know, it's not all about running.
No.
It's about a bigger purpose. It's a bigger soulful purpose. And I think that's cool.
Thank you.
And I think it's really cool. And I think it's cool that we met and we become friends. We're going to be friends from here on out. And I know you're going to impact my life in some way. I know you already have.
Well, you have too.
But I think one thing that I always like to end with, and we're going to include some of these pictures so people can see these people you're talking about and your big paycheck right there. Right. Think about how many people you fed at McDonald's. Well, you didn't think about that, did you?
Yeah, that's true.
But one thing I like is I always want people to come away with if you have like the Trent Sanderson keys or strategies to success. You know, some people say, oh, it's, you know, the golden rule, or, you know, there's always, you know, like, you know, don't be afraid to fail. I mean, if you had some little nugget of something, I mean, would you have something like, it's like I mean, I know we had a lot of stuff.
I know, yeah. I mean, I think saying like you need adversity. It's almost like the soil for everything. And here's something though, because remember I mentioned to you I might not have mentioned this. Most of my kids are strong students, perfect SAT, perfect GPA. And we talked about that before this interview about how sometimes they are realizing the SAT, ACT doesn't define someone. And when you're that smart, it's almost like a photographic memory. You regurgitate it, spit it back out. But what do you do with that, right? So, example, it needs to be instilled. It needs to be something that you built. So, you need adversity in your life. But more importantly, with some of my kids, you also need gratification. Like, you need to feel like, yes, I accomplished this. Like, there's training I put together sometimes, and there's some workouts that I put in there that are a joke. But I'll have them do it, and they're like, wow, I did great, because I know how talented they are. But they're just so down on their luck right now, right? So you need to get that gratification. You need to make sure there's some adversity in there. If things are going well for you, smoothly for you, you need to go look for something that makes you struggle. But more importantly, though, you also need to go back and look at where you've been. So many times when we are that strong student and that MIT grad or whatever, like you could sit there and go, what's enough? Like what? There's no freaking finish line, remember? So I didn't tell you this, but like when my brother got the GED, I honestly think there's a lot of people in their second grade year of school. And they go, I'm gonna be valedictorian. And there was two other kids that started beating them and they go, screw it. And if they would have just found that those people are gonna falter too. Everyone's gonna falter. And what I did as a dyslexic C student, I just watched people and I waited because I knew when they faltered, that was my chance to close the gap a little more, okay? But like you said though, Malcolm Gladwell says it best. I listen to a lot of books on tape, but he talks about, you know, you don't make it through life without other people's help. I used to try to redefine that, thinking, no, I can do this. But I realized, you know what? I am so grateful. You know, we have themes every year. We have these armbands that had our themes on them, and we, some years, make like a gratification rock. So they put it in their pocket, they just rub on it, and they think about the things that they're gratified for. And then that starts bringing in things into their life. They start whole mind synapses where you start thinking about where you're going. So I think that's important. I think that they should really go through life counting their wins. We do that a lot with our kids. You get up in the morning, I don't know if you're a coffee drinker, but all of a sudden your wife brings you a coffee, like that's a freaking win. Like I'm so grateful. And then all of a sudden you pull up to a light, it turns green, that's a win. As soon as you get in a bad karma, you start getting so many wins and watch and see how your freaking day just changes.
Yeah.
And we're human. You know, we all falter. I falter.
And you can't focus on that. If you focus on the past and you focus on your failures and you live there, that's a bad place. But yeah, you focus on your wins, focus on gratitude. You know, I do that every day. Every day I'm grateful for three things. You know, try to make them different things.
Yeah.
But the days I can't think of different things, I'm gonna go back to my good things. Man, grateful for my life and my job, my wife, my kids, and my friends, people I've met along the way. So, and I'm grateful sometimes for the adversity too.
Yeah.
That's a hard thing to be grateful for, but I am grateful for adversity.
And you know, it's like when you have that adversity, you go back and you probably get rid of the stuff that wasn't working and you make it stronger, right?
Yeah.
And that happens a lot. And again, though, if it's just laid down for you, if someone wants to open up a business and the parents just pay the whole year up front, guess what? It'll never be there.
That's right.
And when I look at kids or people I want to hire, I can see it so quickly in people. So.
Yeah. Well, Trent, I know we could sit here and probably go until the moon comes up because I've heard other stories that we've talked about, and it is so fun talking to you and hearing stuff. And even today, I've heard stuff I never heard before. But I want to just tell you thank you so much for being here, and I hope people hear this and get some lessons out of this, because because you are, like I said earlier, you're just a potpourri of information and just nuggets of good stuff. So, man, I appreciate you, brother.
Thanks. And like I said, I'm grateful. I've only got to where I'm at in my life by meeting people. You meet people that you realize that don't value you, and I learned that later in life. You want to put yourself around people that value you. It's also to have some people out there that you're trying to prove to, too. There's a lot of people in my life that always say that they want to get my attention, and down the road, they'll probably look at going, wow, I'm glad you were there. Because if nothing makes you want to be better, then what's the excitement of life, right? I used to talk about being unknown, right? What if your life was completely set up, like you knew exactly when you were going to die, you knew who you were going to marry, you knew how your kids are going to be? How boring would that be, right? The unknown is the most exciting part.
Yeah, that's one of the Tony Robbins talks about. It's one of the 6 things, one of the pillars: certainty and uncertainty.
Yeah.
You got to have both, because
Yeah.
if you don't have uncertainty, then life is boring. So,
Yeah.
well, cool. Thank you so much, brother.